Thank you. I hope I'm going to give a demonstration as much about how to counter the hacking of the online conversation as how to hack it. We heard on the last panel from Jared Green about his reflections from visiting Donbass. We were on that trip together, and I wanted to start by sharing some of my experiences, which were incredibly moving. We went to Avdiivka, a town that's a couple of kilometers away from the front lines of the fighting, and we visited Thank you. I see Svetlana clapping there, who kindly hosted us and really showed us the most incredible time. We visited buildings that had been destroyed by shelling. We saw a railway station that had been landmined, and we saw a monument to the deceased that was made of used-up artillery. So this was really moving on a human level, and it was really visceral. And it was the physical battlefield, the visible signs of war. And I was struck by the contrast between that and the digital battlefield, where the war we're fighting is an invisible one. And I'm not just talking about traditional cyber, which is the hacking of computers and systems. I'm talking about the new frontier for digital conflict, which is hacking the online conversation, when psychological warfare is turbocharged by the internet. On a daily basis around the world, online accounts and activity, pretending to be people and front organizations, is happening in order to manipulate public opinion, to shape behavior on the streets, and even to change the outcomes at ballot boxes. And who's responsible for these types of attacks on the conversation? Increasingly, it could be anyone. Partly because the technical barriers to participating in this type of thing are incredibly low, even lower than traditional cyber hacking. Attribution is even more difficult than with traditional cyber hacking. And there are no laws or norms that govern how countries should respond. So perpetrators, for the moment at least, can really act with impunity. And you're much closer to this, actually, in Ukraine than we are in Silicon Valley. You understand the potential impact of combining kinetic and cyber and information weapons. We in the tech sector are kind of catching up. We're starting to understand more and more the role of our platforms in hybrid warfare, and also the opportunities that there are for us to help protect people. So in my role working with Jared at Jigsaw, there are two questions that I grapple with. One, what are the biggest digital threats out there? And two, how can we protect people from them? Now, when it comes to, lost my train of thought. Well, let me share some reflections, actually, from my own experience at Google, because I've been working at the company for almost 13 years. And I was reflecting on this, that back when I started, when Facebook was just a 2-year-old and Twitter hadn't yet been born, the outlook was very different. You know, we were busy building search engines and video sharing sites and social networks, not mindful that dictators and terrorists and criminals were going to try to use those same platforms against us. We didn't have the foresight to stop them. And today, the internet is the newest and most confounding theater of war, one in which we're likely actors, if not as victims or perpetrators, then as unwitting accomplices. So let's take a look at this invisible threat. How many of you have ever searched for your name online? No, I won't make you show your hands. Oh, I'm so touched by the candor in this room. Everyone does it, and by the way, if you haven't done it, you should. But imagine if you were to type your name right now online, and what came up in the search results were a list of false claims that you're a harasser, an anti-Semite, a traitor, Imagine for a second that it were you who was the target of an army of so-called trolls intent on discrediting and defaming you. I know we have many political figures in this audience. You must know that your online reputations are so frail that they are going to be irresistible to an adversary or a political opponent who wants to penalize you for your positions. In 2016, then Secretary Clinton was targeted by a Kremlin-linked group called the Internet Research Agency in order to diminish her chances of becoming the next US president. The online smear campaign painted her as racist, misogynist, corrupt. And the campaign also used the internet to target Democratic voters, especially African Americans, and to prevent them from turning up on election day. We had the privilege of hearing from Ambassador McFall over lunch. In his new book, the ambassador talked about his experience when he was US ambassador to Russia with an online smear campaign designed to demoralize and discredit him. And one of the accusations was that he was an active pedophile. Those are accusations that are still live today on Russian web pages. And I also don't want to portray there being only one country in the world who's playing at this game. Just last month, we came together with the other social media platforms to announce that we had discovered an extensive online information operation conducted by Iran to influence audiences across 4 continents. And we found electoral races being targeted in everywhere from Mexico to Catalonia and India to the Philippines. So really, in the future, any presidential, parliamentary, local electoral race is going to be targeted. I am actually an optimist about the internet, and normally when I'm not up here under such time constraint, I spend a lot of time talking about all the joys that I think the internet has brought us. But in this context, we have to recognize that the internet has become a vehicle for turning people against their leaders and against one another. And there's a new playbook for how to do this. And if you're not actively playing, you're likely the one that's being played. So a quick question. If you were a malicious actor, which of the following do you think you would value most? A, technical know-how. B, large budgets. Or C, a lack of moral compass. I would say none of the above. I would say that it's D, insight into the human psyche. And let me explain why. In our research at Jigsaw, we've really found that to be key to effective online information operations. We spent some time studying the Islamic State. They've successfully recruited tens of thousands of would-be jihadis to go and fight in Iraq and Syria, not because of their technological genius, but because they've been able to win the hearts and minds by understanding what drives the human beings that they're trying to reach. Even for the Internet Research Agency, there was no real innovation in the way that they use social media. Both groups have been exceptionally effective because of their mastery, not just of technology, but also of psychology. All human behavior can be boiled down to a handful of emotions. Powerful emotions like fear and anger have driven most events that have happened on this planet, and they're now powerful tools that can enable the weaponization of them. Online harassment has become a systematic science of exploiting what makes people afraid, what makes people angry, what makes people insecure, and of pushing those buttons until they're silenced. And when it goes unchecked, free speech is stifled, and we descend into echo chambers, where we're surrounded by people who think just like us. But that actually facilitates the spread of disinformation and enables polarization. So given our mandate at Jigsaw, we did ask ourselves, how can we build tools that can help defend against this type of psychological warfare online? We wondered, what if we could build AI that encompassed not just artificial intelligence, but also emotional intelligence? So that really was a question that inspired our partnership with the rest of Google, Wikipedia, and the New York Times to see if we could build machine learning models, AI that is, that could understand the emotional impact of language. So the first step is to build a very large data set, 1 million+ comments, and we got 10,000 people to score those comments according to their emotional impact. And this was our goal. Build AI that could predict the likelihood that a comment would make somebody leave an online conversation, feel intimidated, feel persecuted, which is an incredibly big ask of algorithms. And I wanted to demonstrate the complexity and the nuance of what we're dealing with when we have these kind of goals for technology. So compare 2 sentences that could have been sent to me before I came to Ukraine. On one hand, break a leg at the YES conference. On the other, I'll break your legs at the YES conference. Okay, so the first one is an expression for wishing someone good luck, especially before they go on stage. And the other one is rather threatening, and I wouldn't like to receive that from someone. Until recently, it was thought that it was impossible to build AI that could understand the difference in language between sentences that looked so similar on the surface, but actually had profoundly different meanings. That's exactly what we've been trying to do with our new technology, Jigsaw, called Perspective. And I'd like to just show you this in action. So on one side, we have the example, break a leg at the YES conference, and on the other, I'll break your leg at the YES conference. And you can faintly make out, you really can't really make out, but you have to trust that I'm reading it to you. On the left, it evaluates this as the left-hand side as not being toxic, not being intimidating, and the right as being a threat. So how can we use this to concretely help with the problem of hacking the online conversation? One, we can help the people who are trying to host conversations online, publishers and platforms. The New York Times, for example, before our collaboration, only had comments turned on for 10% of its articles. The burden of comment moderation was so high that it kind of censored comments for 90% of its articles. With the help of Perspective, they've increased the number of articles with comments turned on by 3 times, and we're just getting started. But what if we could actually prevent harassment even before it takes place? For example, we have the technology to tell you about a typo before you press send on an email, that's spell check. What if we could actually use machine learning to give commenters real-time feedback about how their words might land? Kind of how facial expressions do in a face-to-face conversation. Machine learning isn't perfect, but what I'm here to say is that if we can build AI that truly understands the emotional impact of language, we really have a shot at tackling organized and even recreational trolling, of facilitating conversations between people with genuinely different worldviews, different values, different politics, and of invigorating the spaces that many of us have otherwise given up on. If I can leave you with one message, it is that cyber war is now about more than hacking computers and systems. It's also about hacking into our minds. And if we want to have any hope of building towards a cyber peace, our strategies must include technology that values not just computer intelligence, but also emotional intelligence. And why share that message in Ukraine today? Because the state of the art of our AI currently exists only in English. It doesn't exist in Russian or Ukrainian. And in 2019, we are going to look back and we're going to ask ourselves if we did enough to protect civic discourse in this country in advance of the elections. We have an opportunity to convene the data and the engineering talent to localize tools that could help Ukraine for 2019 and beyond. And that's a conversation that we're looking forward to continuing after today. A Holocaust historian and scholar, Yehuda Bauer, once said, "Thou shalt not be a perpetrator. Thou shalt not be a victim, and thou shalt never, never be a bystander." Are we going to be victims, perpetrators, bystanders, accomplices? I would put it to you that inaction is complicity. So in the information warfare, I hope that we will come together and all be part of the solution. Thank you.